I come from a slightly different perspective to people here, in that I taught RE in a state school. I'm a member of the Church of England, but the vast majority of my life I spent as a SENCO and dealing with children with special needs, although my degree's in theology, and I started out as an RE teacher. And what we're looking at today is teaching RE with autistic students. So first of all, you've got some true and false questions. We're going to looking at through those, we're going to review what autism is. We're going to explore strategies to support autistic students in lessons generally, then looking particularly at the difficulties that students have with RE, and then looking at some strategies, practical strategies to help them. If you struggle with hearing me here, because it's quite an echoey room, do just raise your hand or cup your ears or something like that. But to start with, let's look at these true or falses. 1 minute, go through them with either on your own if you wish, or with someone else. Up to you. Just a few more seconds. Okay, let's just go through these. Thank you. Thank you. So 1 in 60 people are autistic. True, false? What do you reckon? What do you reckon the statistics should be? Some say true?
No idea.
It's the Autistic Society says more than 1 in 100, but we need to bear in mind that this doesn't take into account undiagnosed people, of which females are a huge group, and of course older people. So that tends to be, the group that they come across, which tends to be people under 30, 35, generally speaking. Most of you who are teaching will say in most classes, I would say, you come across someone who's autistic. So I spent a bit of time Googling these stats yesterday. Everyone's got a different stat. But my experience is there's normally somebody in each class, so, More boys than girls are autistic.
False.
Good spot. Yes. We don't know, because girls have been drastically underdiagnosed, because they present often, not always, very differently. And in fact, there are stories of girls who have presented with, in fact, very masculine presenting type of symptoms, and the specialist has said, well, if she was a boy, I'd say she was autistic. So we are having more and more girls who are being diagnosed, more and more women who are being diagnosed, and we're beginning to pick up that actually autism, like many other things, can present differently in different people. Some children go out of autism. They don't. So it's a neurological condition, you don't grow out of it. What you do sometimes is you learn to mask it, or you learn to cope with how the rest of the world expects you to behave to some cost generally, and often mental well-being goes down. Most autistic people have a gift such as mathematics. Actually, you could be anywhere on the ability range. I'm trying to think of the right way to listen to Mary, but you can be anywhere with an autism diagnosis. You are more likely to have lower scores in things like processing, short-term memory, those sorts of things, recall. So a higher proportion of children with an autism diagnosis would be on a lower range of those assessments. Autism can be diagnosed by a blood test. No, it really can't. If only it was that easy. And we'll talk a little bit about what an autism diagnosis looks like very briefly in a moment. Okay. So, autism is a spectrum of needs, and you generally have to have these different things. That the diagnosis descriptors change slightly regularly, but restricted and limited interests. Now it has sensory needs in the diagnostic criteria, which can be a thing outside of autism. You can have sensory needs separate to autism, or with dyslexia or other things. Need for routines and resistance to change, social communication difficulties, including language. So those are what need to be there. I love this quote. Steve Silverman said, autism is like being a Mac user in a Microsoft Word. Hands up, Mac users? Yeah. Do you get really irritated when you're made use of Microsoft because your Mac user is better? Yeah. And then people say, but you've got to do it Microsoft, and you're thinking, but why? Because my way's better. He said, autism is very like that feeling. I've got a better way of functioning, a better way of doing this, and you are making me work to your rules, and it's rubbish. And I think that's a really helpful way to perhaps get a tiny feeling of what it must be like. And Greta Thunberg, who's been in the news loads, is autism a gift? And she said, no, it's not. It's an endless fight in all sorts of ways, but it can be a superpower for her. It's given her the focus that has made her start to change, lots of people's ways of viewing the world. But at some cost, I would imagine. I'm going to just briefly talk about sensory needs, because this is an area that perhaps people aren't quite so aware of. Sight, hearing, taste, touch, smell are the ones we normally think about. And if you think, just think for 30 seconds in an ordinary classroom, your classroom, you taught in yesterday or Thursday or whenever it was, what might be things that are going to irritate someone about the sight, those different 5 areas in your classroom? Perhaps things you can't change. What might?
The chair is being too hard.
Oh, yes. Uncomfortable chairs are actually to the point where you're taking some of your brain space up with coping with the chair. Is there anything else shout out?
Everything's on the board, you might have to let something overload on the board.
Exactly. Your beautiful, jolly, bright displays that are grabbing everybody's attention and actually driving someone to distraction, literally to distraction. Yep.
Building work going on outside your classroom.
Oh yes, building work, everybody's nightmare. My worst ever was one pigeon decapitating another in an observed lesson. It was like a nightmare. In fact, the whole class, we lost the whole class. But yes, building work and any sort of noise. So the hum of the projector, while many can discount it, for some, that can feel like having a pneumatic drill type of feeling, trying to discount that. Touch, we're going to talk about a bit more, but the feeling of the chair, that sort of thing. Smell. Oh, boys and deodorants, soft peeling. So I'm girls as well, I know, but it's when the boys come in wafting of links. And also, I've had lots of autistic students moan about teachers' coffee breath. That's what I want to look out for. At the minute, I am coughs with breath. But, so proprioception, vestibular interoception, have you ever heard of those? So proprioception is the information you get from your joints and your muscles. So it's how you know how hard to tap a hard boiled egg with your spoon to crack it. If you haven't got that feedback, you either go whack and smash it. So that's the child that, when they need to tap someone on the shoulder, actually knocks them 3 feet across the room, and doesn't mean to, doesn't understand why they're in trouble. Or the child is supposed to do something and actually barely touches the paper. So it's not having that, and that also affects things like if you put your hands behind your back and touch one of your fingers, how do you know which finger you're touching? Well, even if you're not counting which finger it is, you just know. But if you've got to work that out from scratch because the information isn't coming back accurately, you can imagine how that affects self-care and all sorts of other issues. Vestibular is the balance. So quite often people with autism have what's called comorbidity, another diagnosis of dyspraxia or developmental coordination difficulty, because it's a common issue. So learning to run, catching balls, all that sort of thing might be difficult. And in RE, we probably don't do a huge amount of running around, although we did bits in my lessons. But, that can, and of course that affects handwriting, it affects core strength, that sort of thing. Interoception is the information from your body's organs, roughly speaking. So the child who's in a real grump because they don't realise they're thirsty. The child who's actually unwell and is running a temperature but hasn't acknowledged that that's an issue, that that's happening to them. So children who are not picking up what they're feeling and what that means for them physically. So those are common issues for young people with autism, well, everybody with autism, not just young people. And as a result of their sensory needs, quite often young people will, and children will stim, adults will as well, but they might have disguised it better to keep everybody happy. So by secondary school it might present as tapping or rocking or a particular twitch or constantly flicking through a book or something like that. And if you can offer a way for a young person to do that discreetly, they'll be forever grateful. But if they're stimming, that means that they're not comfortable. They're seeking comfort. So if you've got someone who's doing that maybe, that means, you know, that's their stim. Thinking, you need to be thinking, what's going on for this person? Why are they anxious? What's making them struggle? Masking is becoming increasingly obvious that that's a big issue for lots of people. So when people say to parents, he's coping brilliantly in school, and they think he comes home every day and has a meltdown. He's not coping in school. What he's doing is looking like he's coping in school. He's masking it. And of course you can imagine the cost that has to your mental health and the energy that takes. So if you're spending a whole lesson trying to look, working in a group, trying to look as though you're taking part and you're coping and you're one of the cool guys and all of that, there's not much room left for thinking about what you're meant to be doing. So that's an issue as well. And of course anxiety can become a chronic condition. For the proportion of people with autism who develop mental health needs is massively high. Okay, but people have strengths, and I'm very aware that we need to be talking about these. When I read a lovely article about disabilities in heaven, and some autistic people were interviewed, and they said, well, would you like to be autistic in heaven, or would you like to get rid of your autism in heaven? And it was a bit of an odd question, and they nearly all but one, I think, said, well, I'm autistic, that's who I am. So of course I'll be autistic in heaven. I think the hope was that heaven would be a more receptive place to be autistic in. But it is a thing that people want to be if that's who they are. But common strengths that we can exploit in our teaching, very good at looking at detail. Very good at looking at detail. Very good at spotting patterns. So we can exploit that as we look at texts and patterns in text, for example. Very good at open-minded questions. You know the brilliant question that comes out of the left field and just sets your lesson alight. They're very good at following guidance carefully, so if you give them a task and show them how to do it, that's how it will be done. So there are some real strengths. This PowerPoint will be on the website later if you want to look at it. So this is just a little illustration of autism spectrum as explained with ping pong balls. Okay, so if you want to get an autism diagnosis, you have to get, if you like, a certain number of balls in your bowl. A certain number of ticks on a chart, if you like. So I've got some pink ones here, and these are called restricted interests. So if you've got some restricted interests in your bowl when you're assessed, then that goes towards your diagnosis. If you've got it dashed in the car, sensory needs, you might have a lot of sensory needs, so oh, it's getting quite near the top. If you've got some need for routine and resistance to change, oh, this person's getting very near to the top of their bowl. So you think, oh yeah, there's an autism diagnosis, but no, because they haven't got any of this in, social communication difficulties. You've got to have some of each in your bowl, and the bowl has got to get to the top, if you like, to get your diagnosis. But the composition of those balls, I've tried to make them very different for colourblind people, if you're a colourblind person. But you might have loads of pink, 2 green, 1 blue, and some yellow. Or you know, it can be a different variation. So if you know an autistic person, think, that's fine, I know how to teach RE to my autistic students, I've taught Fred. And then you go to your next lesson and meet Louise, who is completely different. That's why. And if you imagine you're holding that bowl all day, trying to manage these needs as you go to your various lessons, and then you may well need to add in a bit of dyslexia, maybe a bit of dyspraxia, maybe a hearing issue, or so. You can imagine how difficult it is to balance your bowl all day. And that's how it feels to have to take this everywhere you go and manage that and fit into everybody else's needs. So it's just a little way of thinking about an autism diagnosis. There are different ways to talk about autism. You can talk about autism spectrum condition. Now lots of people don't like that because they say, well, I haven't got a condition, I'm just autistic. It's not a condition I've got, it's not like measles. Autism spectrum disorder, really unpopular. Although that's the ASD that people talk about. Because people say, I'm not disordered, I'm not wrongly made, and particularly in a Catholic school, you're thinking you are a creature made by God, individual, special and precious. And why are we saying from the off that you're disordered? That doesn't feel right. Lots of people don't like autistic person because it says I'm autistic before I'm a person, if you see what I mean. But people don't like person with autism, those that you drag behind you, everywhere you go. There is no good language, is what I've decided, but just be aware that different people you teach might have different preferences. Okay, so strategies to teach autistic people in lessons, generally speaking. First of all, have a brief plan of the lesson available, a visual timetable. Can be just scribbled on the board, whiteboard. Doesn't have to be fancy. If you've got younger children, anyone here from primary school, check if you've got a widget online. Beautiful, easy peasy illustrations to use to get a really lovely visual timetable. How many people turned up here and checked when coffee time was and lunchtime on their little plan? Who turned up and looked at what they're doing for the day? Yeah, we all like to know where we are and what we're doing. And the same thing, small scale in the lesson. And if your visual plan, you've got halfway through the lesson, you think, actually, we're not going to have time for that, that's fine, just say, we're taking this bit out. But people need to know where they are. Really simple strategy that is perhaps the most useful. Oh, sorry. Have a routine for your lesson, especially the opening and closing. It's the anxious time. Just arrive from somewhere else, if you're in secondary school, or just move from another activity if you're in primary school, and everything's all up in the air, and you're not quite sure, and it's noisy. And also, getting ready to move on to the next lesson, routine is incredibly valuable. And actually saves you loads of time planning as well. Prepare for changes in routine at Christmas or Easter or different events. Tell people ahead how things are going to be. Exam time's a big one for that. Maybe even walk people to where they're going to be or plan how you're going to get there. If you're having a fire drill, I used to very quietly whisper in people's ears there was going to be a fire drill. So they were prepared for it and they weren't panicked. We talked about sensory needs and perhaps how we can think about distractions. You may not be able to change them, but you can at the very least acknowledge that they are there. You need to give people extra time to process information and answers. And this can be, as much as 15 seconds. A long time. And it doesn't help. So if I'm teaching James, I'm going to use this example, if I ask you a question, and you're looking at me completely blankly, and I think, oh, she hasn't got that. So I'll rephrase the question. Rephrase the question, so she's now got 2 sentences to think about, instead of 1. So look at people's faces. If they're, it doesn't always work for autistic people because their expressions don't always show on their face, but you'll get to know your students, and quite often there's a different expression from I don't understand to I am actually thinking about this. And 15 seconds is a long, long time. But so you can leave that question, park that, think about that, ask a question here or to the rest of the class, come back and get the answer. That's fine. Why do autistic people need extra time? Because for them, processing metaphorical or language or implied information takes a lot longer. You have to consciously think about what you mean about a metaphor, or consciously think about what's included in that text or in that spoken word that is not clear or evident to them. Because they have often a very literal use of language. So, the Lord is my shepherd doesn't carry connotations instantly that would be easy for them. Processing information that doesn't match what is expected from facial expressions or context. So that, if someone says something but their body language doesn't match it, they won't necessarily get that it's a bit of irony or a joke. Have to think quite hard about that. Processing information regarding a different emotional response to their experience. It's an essay for homework tonight, bad luck chaps sort of thing. And I think, that's my favourite sort of homework actually. I've got to go off and draw a picture of something I don't really understand. So they might struggle with that. And because if you have autism as a diagnosis, you are massively more likely to have another diagnosis that goes with it, like dyslexia or developmental language difficulty, both of which carry issues about processing time. So very often, autistic people, even extremely able autistic people, can take a long, long time to process information. So that's a really useful thing just to bear in mind. And what I used to do with some of my youngsters, I used to write on my lesson plan, I'd quietly count how many seconds. So Tom, who used to sit here, I knew was 9 seconds. And by 11 seconds I could challenge him for an answer. Sophie over here was about 14 seconds. And I just used to scribble that on my lesson plan, because it just reminded me, because I know primary school is slightly different, secondary, you could teach 300-400 kids a week. And I think, I remember that for next week. And then, you ask me, no, I shouldn't have done that, I shouldn't have done that. So I used to write that down. And pass it on to other members of staff and go, oh yes. An obvious one is to avoid irony and sarcasm. But quite hard to do when you've got a really engaged, lovely group of kids who are having some lovely chat and fun and jokes, and perhaps they're using irony and sarcasm in their, lovely way of talking in a group maybe. You just have to be aware that you don't use it, and that you might need to translate a little bit for some young people. Okay, providing visual support. This is the second. If you want to do something for every group of people with additional needs, provide visual support. It's just, everything you can think of it supports. And the thing that I found really helpful in RE was not visual support in the way of pictures, and works of art and that sort of thing, but diagrams. And I'll show you some examples and some sources of those later. So diagram versions of where this story fits into the life of Jesus. Diagram versions of the 5 pillars of Islam. Were brilliant. I did some interviews with autistic people leading up to some work I'm doing on reading the Bible with autistic people. And time and time and time again, people said, we want visual things, please. And if we can't have visual things, we want everything well spaced so we've got time to think. And they meant written wise as well as speaking wise. So, to give time to think, stimming can sometimes be translated into doodling. I don't know how many of you presented training in staff meetings, and you look around and see how many members of staff are doodling. And then I think to myself, and you're the people that tell children not for doodling in your class. But I don't know what the proportion is, I don't know if there's any research on it, but a huge number of us need to doodle to think, or write notes. So actually printing out well-spaced text with a good margin, and so people can highlight or add notes or doodle, it's actually really helpful. My son is a youth worker in a large church, and the most popular thing he did with his youth group last term was print out the text of the Bible text in which the sermon was going to be based, and the 3 main points of the preachers, which meant they had to prepare ahead of time. And then they left the rest of the sheet blank. And actually, other members of the church were saying, can we have one of those? And people came back and said, that was really helpful. And saying next week, I remembered that because that, because they have a visual memory of it. So really useful. You have to balance that up with your time and energy. But if you're teaching something year after year, once you've got it prepared, you've got it prepared. It's easy. Scaffolding. I'm sure lots of us do this, preparing guided plans for essays or exam answers or anything else you care to mention, with sentence starters and that sort of thing. I guess most of you have taught autistic children. How many of you have walked around the classroom, set the task up, wandered around, got to the autistic person who's sitting there frozen? Anybody have that experience? Is there a problem? Do you understand? Tell me what you've got to do. Always get them to explain the task, not just do you understand it, because they always say yes. What have you got to do? They know what they've got to do. What's the problem? I don't know what to say. I don't know what to start with. So the first stage of that is to give them some sentence starters and to provide a structure. And if you're teaching GCSEs, you go, or A-levels, you go onto the websites and you go to courses and find out what the exam board are looking for, and you teach them how to write like that, which is, in my view, a really sad way of doing it, but that's, that's the hoop we jump through. But you're not going to want to give them sentence starters forever. They've got to learn to do it sometime on their own. So the next thing you do is offer them 3 sentence starters to choose from. Okay? So they've got to then choose which they think is the best sentence starter. And then after that, you get them to create 3 sentence starters, and I would do it on mini whiteboards so they can rub them off. And you haven't got this anguish of what you do if it's wrong, and I'm going to make my book look awful. And it won't be neat, and that'll worry me. So that's a really little way forward then. And then you could teach them to write it on their a scrap of paper, the back of their exam paper, if that's the thing they need to do to give themselves a prompt. But it's just a no-cost way of getting them to be a little bit more independent. Plan group work. Oh, the nightmare of group work for autistic students. Actually I gave up asking children to always go into group. I used to say, we're going to do this in groups of 3 or 4, whatever it is, and I always planned the groups. I never ever didn't regret letting people choose their own groups. Teaching for 40 years, every time I said, yes, choose your own groups, and as they did it, you think, I know I'm tired, but this is a stupid mistake, and I'm going to pay dearly for this for the next 20 minutes. Be really crystal clear about the roles in the group, don't let them choose for themselves, because either someone won't be able to manage that, or they'll insist on being chairman and be really cross their idea hasn't been accepted by anybody else. What's the student going to do if they find it difficult? How are they going to let you know? Or if they feel everybody else isn't obeying the rules? What's the get out clause for them? So I used to consider an option or a similar task on their own. As you get to know students, you know what groups they can work in. But for some students, I'd say, most people do these groups, would you prefer to do a version of this on your own? Oh, yes, please. Oh, yes. You can see relief pouring off them. Or I'd say, you could do the first 10 minutes in the group and then opt out. or you know, you get to some compromise. We want to train our children to be resilient and cope with stuff, but I don't want to train them to have to be more resilient than everybody else, because they need, you know, just because they struggle with groups. Why are we saying that being in groups is really important and they must learn how to do it? Well, they need to learn to cope, but let's be gentle as we teach them to cope. And actually, if being in group is so all-encompassingly hard for them, what thinking are they going to do? So, it varies from child to child, you know, and from time of the day. You know, you'll have some children that can do groups in the morning, but not last thing in the afternoon, and definitely not after PE. And on a windy day, you might as well just forget it. You know, so you'll know what children can cope with after a while. People differ on this. I've always offered a timeout system, which for my youngsters, because I had a big classroom, was actually, we had a quiet corner of the classroom, and that was fine. If you've got, you know, if you're all hugger-mugger and it's not going to work, talk to other members of staff. I think this is something that should be done through a school, really, you know, universally. But if you're in a school where it's not, you might have to make it work for your children. So for some children, you know, I've taught in classrooms which are like the size of this part of the room, you know, with, I don't know how many dozen kids in there. And time out was actually, I'm allowed to put my hands on my head on my hands and just sit quietly. We've done it with diaries with green and red sheets, you know, that a red sheet means I just need 5 minutes. There are lots of ways around. There's lots of ways to silently communicate this without saying, excuse me, miss, I need some time out, which is going to take more resources than most people can take. Or you've got to a sort of meltdown place by that point. So just thinking about that, talking to other staff, and if you've got a whole school system you can sign into, even better. So, bit time for you. What difficulties do autistic students experience when studying RE? In just 2 or 3 minutes, what particular difficulties come up for RE? Okay, thank you. Can you shout out, please, what difficulties might autistic students experience when studying RE?
Basic Bible stories, literally.
Literal use of language. And I used to find they got really muddled between stories that involved Jesus and parables.
Yeah.
You know, the number of times children said, when Jesus was sorting the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll talk about how to manage that. Yeah, another one.
Fixating on the wrong bit of the story. I had a student that told me about the entry into Jerusalem and the donkey. He just couldn't get beyond the donkey, and the donkey was really important. And he wrote me this beautiful paragraph about how Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem was about how Jesus was showing that animals were important.
Yeah, I had how Mary went to Bethlehem on a donkey, which is not in the text, was cruelty to the donkey. Oh, yes. I couldn't move them. Yeah, another one?
Belief.
Go on.
Belief, so it's much of the idea that people believe in this inanimate God, they can't.
So the whole abstract.
And some practicing Catholic families, but they will have a child, you know.
Yes. And it can feel very abstract, I think, for lots of autistic youngsters. Yes. Anything else?
I have one lad in one of my classes who won't talk in a whole class setting. If I go across to him and the others are doing some work, he'll answer a question for me one-to-one. What do you want to answer in full class?
And of course, because debate and discussion is such a big part of our subject, that's actually very limiting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I bet he's got lots of things coming in his
and
head.
he does.
So there's inherent frustration there, isn't there? Anything else?
Just all the symbolism kind of within liturgy, sacrament.
Absolutely. So, these are the things I came up with. Metaphor, imagery, analogy, stylized language, so we've covered some of that. And we'll look at that. Visual metaphors, the Sacred Heart is an example. Unregulated empathy. So there is a view that autistic people can't be empathic. That's a load of rubbish. For most autistic people, the problem is unregulated empathy. So, for some people, they may struggle to feel empathy with other people, but for others, completely the opposite. I had a child, we were doing something work on charities. I flashed up a Christian Aid poster supporting children in a famine, and the child with autism wept and wept and wept for an hour. And actually, hers was the appropriate response. The rest of us were going, oh yes, this is a short-term need, you know, and just having raised money. And actually hadn't acknowledged that this was a picture of a child starving to death. And as this poor girl was in pieces, and I had to sort of send her to a quiet place to recover. But actually hers was the appropriate response. But the problem was that she was not empathic. It was the fact that she couldn't switch it on and off, like other people sometimes do. Yes?
That's exactly with Greta Thunberg and the environment. She's
Yes.
so passionate about it, and that comes through in her speeches and she's taught.
Yes.
The fact that she walked out of school at first, it all fits, and that's where you do get these people, they do have this unregulated empathy, but it's not necessarily when we want it to be displayed or how we want it, but they are them, and that's how it comes through.
Linking with that, you know, if you're doing some sort of work with the Bible or other religious texts, and you're trying to get people to understand how someone felt in a story, they might find that very difficult. So they can't switch it on and off. There might be some rigidity of thinking, for example, in ethical issues. This is wrong, full stop, no point talking about it, that's how it is. Or the other way around. Understanding context, biblical teaching, church teaching, and church history. I've heard autism described as context blindness, which I think is a little bit unfair. I think context short-sightedness would be fairer. I'm extremely short-sighted. When I was a little girl, I got glasses at age about 6, and before that we'd gone out every Saturday afternoon, and we'd get out of the car and my dad would say, look at the lovely view. I just thought as the grown-ups did, like drink coffee. Then I got my glasses and I got out of the car, and my dad said, look at the lovely view, and I thought, oh, that's what a view is! Oh, that's amazing! So I needed the tools, I needed the specs, but I also needed someone to take me to show me. So we're going to look at how we use some very simple tools and how you show people. I've got that bottom in the wrong place. That's a way of helping people. We'll come back to that, sorry. So, we've talked about using visuals, especially diagrams. So here's a visual. It's not a very good copy. This is the quality of wine during a wedding. So this is the standard procedure. Well, this is what happens if Mary and Jesus come to your wedding. I took this from, I don't know if you've come across theology grounds. Has anyone come across there? I found these browsing in a bookshop, and you know, I don't know if you've had things in a bookshop where you fall about laughing, think I just have to buy those. So there's some funny things in here, but there are some brilliant analyses of the structure of Revelation. Just flicking through. The incarnational washing line. Fully God, fully human, there's Jesus. Some you might agree with, some you might disagree with. But Rich Wilde does some brilliant ideas. And once you start getting those ideas, you start getting children to create them as well. One of the best lessons I ever did was, can you do a diagram, a graph or a diagram of some way of what you think happens after people die? It was an amazing lesson. It just went on and on, it was so funny. So, using visuals to explain large-scale content. So the tool is a visual, but you have to explain it, show people. So here's an example. Again, I'm sorry it's not a brilliant version. This came from Vaughan Roberts' God's Big Picture, the storyline of the Bible. It's from the evangelical end of the Christian spectrum, but it has got some really good diagrams that help you look at the whole picture of the Bible. Do come look at these afterwards. But they're just examples. You can do your own. You can get students at GCSE and A-level to do their own and share them. What a wonderful lesson. So things like, there's one in the theologograms of what happens during the Last Supper in the 4 different Gospels and what that shows about what the focus of the Gospels is. Brilliant. So looking at the big picture gives perspective for lots of young people. So autistic people will more normally focus on detail. You're trying to expand their view. Look at the whole timeline of Jesus' life, or the early church, or how the creeds developed as they did because of the context of the different disputes that you might want to go in the whole history line. So really look at the big picture. Okay. And then I think you want to look at the medium scale. So we talked about people taking things literally, and I think one of the in religious text. So I'm thinking about the Bible particularly here, but you could transfer this to other faiths as well. Keep referring back to different types of religious writing. Autistic people can cope with poetry in English, so they can cope with poetry in the Bible. Well worth going to watch a couple of poetry lessons as part of your CPD and seeing how the English teachers cope with this. But it gives medium scale context. And for those children that like to spot patterns, use that skill. What sort of writing is this? So, we know it's historical writing, for example, in the Bible, because they always mention the ruler, or what had happened. The Babylonians had just done this. When Isaiah 6, when Isaiah was ruling, the beginning of the Luke's Gospel, the context of who was ruling, and what was happening at the time. And so one of these Bible library things, it's quite a young thing to do with your children. I used to teach this in year 7 all the time. But have it up all the time. Go back to it. Remind people of it. Remind them that this bit of the Bible is history, this bit is law. The bit we're studying at the moment is poetry. It's a psalm or lyrics of a song. So we're not expecting it to be literally true all the time. So really useful to keep going back to that. And one of the things that one of my interviewees said, that they have to be pointed to the phrases that signal parable ahead, for example. So, when Jesus told this parable, she said, someone will read that out, but I won't notice it. I need someone to say that to me. So just, it might feel like you're being a bit, unkind or being simplistic, but just pointing out things that would feel obvious to you. This is a psalm, so it's going to be poetical, like the lyrics of the song. Just gives them some context. Students also enjoy hearing about the context of the time and putting it into a historical perspective. And I found Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes by Kenneth Bain really useful. And the kids loved hearing the corners of all sorts of bits and pieces that I gleaned from that. Explaining symbolism and imagery, I think, who was it you came up with that one? So I was thinking about this and I thought, I was lucky enough to help co-author the workbooks for OUP. And I thought, somewhere in there, there's a brilliant example of this. So I'm just going to show you. You have to study art if you're junior school, primary school teachers won't know. You have to study some art in some of the, and this is beautifully annotated to explain. And the Sacred Heart one, page 35, it explains it, it's got some, you can't see it, but have a look later. This symbolises, this symbolises, and that's fascinating. Oh yeah, I get that now. It didn't mean his heart was actually like this big. literally. Because you talk about literal use of language, but you can also interpret pictures literally, and that can lead to all sorts of issues. And I would do the same with teaching the Eucharist. Lots of what does this symbolise? What does what are the different pieces of liturgical equipment you're using? Candles. What does all this symbolise? Being very specific, it can be very helpful. Metaphors are a real stumbling block for lots of autistic people. One thing we do for little ones is we get them to get a metaphor notebook and they write down. When Liz says it's raining cats and dogs, it just means it's raining heavily. And they might do a little picture of cats and dogs, or when she says pull up your socks, it means I need to try harder, And I think I've done that with RE as well. I taught in a rural school, so lots of the kids were shepherds or shepherds' kids. So we talked about the difference between Jewish shepherding and British shepherding. Jesus is not someone with a big dog and a big bike thing and chases sheep everywhere. Jesus was like a Jewish shepherd who would lead people and so on. And ethical stances, some think this because, other think this because. Give them reasons rather than feelings. Try and incorporate special interests if you can. It's a little bit stretched, but it's always worth a try.